This is World History 1, Chapter 5, Video Segment 4, Democracy and Greece's Golden Age. So, while Athens was in power, one of the main leading figures was Pericles. He held power for 32 years, from 461 to 429 BC. Pericles was fair, honest, he was a good general, a good politician, and a great public speaker. Pericles had three goals for Athens. Goal number one, strengthen democracy. So make Athens' form of government better. Number two was hold and strengthen the Athenian Empire. So keep what they had, add to it. And the third one was to glorify Athens, to make it the greatest city-state in all of Greece and one of the greatest places in all the world. To achieve goal number one, he wanted to increase the number of paid public officials. At this point, there were only a few people who were paid for their government job. So today we have senators, we have representatives, so on and so forth. They're all paid a salary every year to do that. Back then in Athens, their officials were not. So this meant if you were going to have a high-ranking position in government, you had to have enough money to support yourself without working. So that meant that only the very rich who owned land, had servants and slaves to work their fields, could participate in the top tier of government. By allowing more paid public officials, this means that anyone could serve, even the poor, because they would be compensated for their time. It meant more people could participate in the government, and they also switched to direct democracy, which is one person, one vote on everything. So when a new law is proposed, everyone gets the opportunity to vote on it. Number two, to hold and strengthen the empire. It was to still form the Delian League, but Athens dominated it. They began to use money from the treasury that was supposed to be for a common defense to make the Athenian navy the strongest in the entire Mediterranean. Athens' prosperity depended on access to waterways, bringing food and trade goods in, and then their ability to then police the Mediterranean with their ships. If somebody didn't pay tribute, they could take their navy, blockade that place, and basically put a chokehold on them until they ponied up their money for the treasury. And then number three, to glorify Athens, Pericles took money from the League, which once again was supposed to be used for common defense, to beautify Athens. They bought gold, ivory, marble, and then they paid people to use those substances to build things, to rebuild the Acropolis, to make temples, statues, things like that, to make Athens very visually stimulating. Here we see a statue of Pericles. What I want you to do is analyze the statue. What does the statue tell us about Pericles and his character, his personality, about him? Don't forget to cite specific examples from the statue itself. So, what type of person is Pericles? How do you know? What tells you that? And don't forget to look at parts of the statue that may have eroded over time. If you look at his hand here, and then you look at his hand here. What has fallen off here? What has fallen off here? What could it have been? Here is the Parthenon as it sits today. Actually, they're rebuilding it in the process of it, but this is what the Parthenon looked like during Pericles' time. It is eroded over time, but you can see the columns, the triangles and other geometric shapes that was part of that classical architecture and engineering, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the chapter. Here is the entire Acropolis and Parthenon, where all the statues and things were. So it wasn't just the Parthenon. There were several other smaller temples and buildings that went with it. This is a temple to Athena and Nike. Nike's winged victory. Here is the statue of Athena that we'll talk about here in a minute. That was 3 stories tall, so on and so forth. Here is the statue of Athena. This is one of the things. That was built during Pericles' time. Now this is a reproduction of it. The original one was destroyed. Here, that's Athena holding Nike, winged victory. It's 30 feet tall, made of marble and adorned in gold. And then here you see this pool that's meant to act as a mirror to reflect this image here. So just keep in mind how tall this is, all the columns, and how much time and effort went into this statue and the building itself. So glorious art and architecture. You've already seen some of those, some of it. Now we're going to talk about it. The Parthenon, which you've seen, was 23,000 square feet. It was built in that the traditional classical style that we talked about. Columns, geometric shapes like triangles, circles, half circles, things like that. You saw the temple to the goddess Athena. The person who was in charge of that was a sculptor named Phidias. He's the one who came up with the design for the 30-foot tall Athena, made with gold and ivory, as you saw a picture of the modern day one. Part of this art and architecture is that figures were made in their perfect form. They were very serene, and they were put in idealized motion. So you get big buff guys in perfect form doing whatever they are. In classical art, emphasized harmony, order, balance, and proportion. So you're going to see a lot of symmetry, things go in a logical form. Very different than modern art today. Drama. Some of the other things in Athens, well, in Greece as a whole, but mainly in Athens, were theaters, drama. The Greeks had the first theaters in the entire Western Hemisphere. The theaters were open to everyone, both poor and rich, and it was free to get in. It was free because the wealthy paid for the productions, the plays there. The plays stressed values and duties to the gods, so not only a religious aspect, but also a moral character aspect to them. The plays used costumes, they had a chorus, and things would be overly dramatized. There were two types of plays for the Greeks. The first is a tragedy. This was a serious drama. They dealt with topics like love, hate, war, betrayal, and they always had a tragic hero. He had extraordinary feats, but he also always had a tragic flaw. Most of the time this was hubris, which is excessive pride to the point where it hurts the individual. And that tragic flaw, whatever it was, whether it be greed or anything else like that, was meant to show why you shouldn't be greedy, why you shouldn't be proud, why you shouldn't be whatever. Because that flaw is what brings that hero down, what is his undoing. So it was a way, just like Aesop's fables, to prove a point. There are a few famous dramatists. Aeschylus had 80 plays, one of which was Ortygia. It's about Agamemnon's family. Agamemnon, if you remember from earlier in the chapter, was the king of the Mycenaeans during the Trojan War. So it's about his family, and the theme of the play is justice. Sophocles is another tragedist. He wrote 100 plays, one of which is Oedipus the King, which we're going to look at, read through, and describe in class, so we won't mention it here. Euripides had a play called Medea, and in his plays he had women, strong women, that are uncharacteristic of other playwrights at the time. Women were kind of downgraded second class, but not for Medea. Also, a key thing about Greek plays, women were not allowed to perform in plays. So whenever there was a women character, it was generally a young boy who would be placed in women's clothing, women's dress, because their voice hadn't changed yet, and that's who would, generally speaking, play women in plays. So a bit odd there as well. Comedy, that's the second type of Greek play. Oftentimes these are slapstick situations and crude humor. So think of the Three Stooges meets Tosh.0. That's about what their comedies were like. So over-exaggerated things and very crude. Comedies made fun of politics and respected people. So it's like Saturday Night Live today when they make fun of celebrities and political officials. The difference is that people, it was kind of a good thing if you were made fun of. People didn't take offense to it. They thought it was funny, and they're like, hey, wow, that's me up there getting made fun of. So it's kind of like a comedy roast almost that you would see today. One famous comedist was Aristophanes. He wrote The Birds and Lysistrata, which we will also look at in class. Lysistrata is about women and the Peloponnesian War. So they talk about topics that are happening during their time period. And it's kind of a way to show what's wrong in society, and then hopefully that problem will be corrected. What this tells us, if you have all these plays making fun of people and events, it's just that the people of Athens had a freedom and openness that they could be made fun of, but they didn't care. They wouldn't take offense to it. They wouldn't put people in jail or harm them or things like that. It was almost as like a badge of courage or a badge of honor to have a play made about you. Other works at the time, Herodotus wrote the Histories. We've already looked at that in class when we were discussing the Persian Wars, and that was a history of Greece and Persia leading up to the Persian Wars. Thucydides is another historical writer, and he stressed that events reoccur over time, and that you should study the past to understand the future, and he wrote a book about the Peloponnesian Wars. And now we'll talk about the Peloponnesian Wars, and that's what happens when Athens and Sparta go to war with one another. It's called the Peloponnesian War because Sparta and her allies were from the Peloponnese, which is the southern tip of Greece, after the Isthmus of Corinth. So that's why it's the Peloponnesian War. So in 431 BC, Sparta declares war on Athens, known as the Peloponnesian War. Athens had a great navy, better than the Spartans, but Sparta had the #1 land army. Here's the problem. Sparta is located in the middle of the Peloponnese, so you can't get there by boat. It means they can't be attacked by sea by the Athenians. And with Athens' case, Sparta could attack it by land, but they couldn't blockade the harbor. So no matter what happened, Athens could still get ships in and out of its harbor, and the Spartans couldn't do anything about it. So they're kind of both at an impasse. Pericles was in charge during part of the Peloponnesian War. His main goal was to avoid any land battles with the Spartans because he knew he would lose. He was waiting for a chance where he could use his superior neighbor to attack by sea. The Spartans moved into Athenian territory, and they began conquering it. They take over the farms, things like that. But Athens was okay because the Spartans couldn't block their harbor, so they could bring in ships, food, supplies, everything else from their allies. And Sparta couldn't shut them down. During the second year of the war, a plague strikes Athens. All the people from the countryside had to flee into the city, where they'd be protected by the city walls. And when you bring people close together, we know today that's a breeding ground for disease. People are cramped, tight together, very easy to pass on a sickness from one person to the next, which is why 1/3 of the city dies of this plague, including Pericles himself. The fighting will continue until 421 BC, where a truce is signed and the fighting stops. However, the war does not end there. In 415 BC, Athens dispatches troops. They sent 20,000 troops to defeat Syracuse, which was Sparta's wealthiest ally. They figured if they could get rid of Syracuse, they could fight Sparta one-on-one and they could win. However, in 413 BC, it's a crushing defeat for Athens. They were lured into a ravine in Syracuse. The troops went into this ravine. Then all of a sudden, the Syracusans popped up from on top of the ravine and began dropping boulders down on the Athenian troops. Destroyed their army, and then the Syracusans then destroyed Athens' fleet. Athens fought on until 404 BC, when Athens and her allies were forced to surrender to the Spartans.